On the 8th of September, 1900, Galveston, Texas, awoke to the rays of a golden sun, unaware that this was the final dawn for the gem of the South. In those days, Galveston was more than just a city, it was an ambition. The state's most prosperous port and the fourth wealthiest city in the United States, Galveston was known as the New York of the Gulf. Here, fortunes were forged in cotton and grain. Here, elegant Victorian mansions were built. And here, people believed that progress had made man the master of nature. But by the next morning, Galveston had transformed into a giant mass grave, becoming the site of the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. This is the story of how meteorological arrogance and bureaucratic blindness led to the deaths of 12,000 souls. Galveston was built on a barrier island, a narrow strip of sand wedged between the Gulf of Mexico and Galveston Bay. Its highest point in 1900 was only 8.5 feet above sea level. The residents knew of storms, but they lived as captives to a dangerous delusion. The local press and even scientists had claimed for decades that, due to the unique slope of the Gulf floor, a catastrophic storm surge was physically impossible here. It was believed that the shallow waters would break any large wave before it reached the shore. This false sense of security became the foundation upon which the ocean erected its scaffold. The central figure of this drama was Isaac Cline, the head of the local weather bureau. Cline was a brilliant scientist, but he became a hostage to politics. In those years, a quiet war raged between the weather services of the U.S. and Cuba. Cuban meteorologists, whose lives had depended on understanding cyclones for centuries, telegraphed Washington, "A powerful storm is moving directly toward Texas." But American officials in Washington, gripped by colonial arrogance, deemed the Cubans incompetent and blocked their reports. A reassuring message was sent to Galveston instead. The storm is moving north toward Florida. On the morning of September 8, Isaac Cline walked to the shore and felt a chill in his chest. The barometer was falling with terrifying speed, and the sea began to breathe. Strangely huge, heavy gray waves rolled onto the beach despite a total lack of wind. Realizing the magnitude of his superior's fatal error, Cline broke all protocols. He mounted a horse and rode along the water's edge, urging vacationers and residents to retreat inland to the island's highest points. But Galveston Island was a trap. By noon, the bridges connecting it to the mainland began to crumble under the battering of the first swells. The path to safety was cut off. By 5 o'clock in the evening, the city was plunged into a twilight that had nothing to do with a sunset. The sky took on an ominous copper hue and then turned pitch black. The wind, which soon exceeded 135 miles per hour, no longer whistled. It roared like thousands of jet engines. Eyewitnesses recalled that the sound of the storm was so powerful that people could not hear each other's screams, even when standing side by side. Grand Victorian mansions that seemed immovable began to vibrate and then disintegrate like houses of cards. Heavy oak doors were torn from their hinges, and pianos and kitchen stoves flew through the streets, turning into projectiles. But it wasn't just the wind that killed. It was the water. At 6:30 p.m., a storm surge over 15 feet high engulfed the entire island. The city simply ceased to exist as dry land. The ocean and the bay met directly over the streets, turning Galveston into a boiling cauldron of debris and bodies. Those who tried to swim were instantly caught in a meat grinder of sharp splinters and broken glass. The water was icy and black, filled with silt that clogged eyes and lungs. One of the most heartbreaking chapters of that night was the fate of St. Mary's Orphanage. 10 nuns, realizing the building was about to collapse, decided on a desperate gesture of faith and love. They took long clotheslines and tied 93 children to one another, tethering the loose ends to their own belts. They hoped the living chain would help the small children withstand the torrent. But when the ocean breached the walls of the orphanage, the ropes became deadly snares. In the morning, rescuers found the bodies of the nuns, with the dead children still tied to them. Only 3 boys survived by clinging to a tree. Isaac Cline himself passed through a personal hell that night. His sturdy house was ripped from its foundation and smashed to pieces. He survived by clinging to debris with his 2 daughters, drifting in total darkness in waist-deep freezing water. But his wife, Cora, disappeared into the depths. Cline drifted among the ruins of his city, hearing cries for help that faded one by one into the roar of the wind. The dawn of September 9 revealed a picture that the human mind refused to process. Galveston was covered by a mountain of garbage, the so-called debris ridge, 3 stories high and 5 miles long. It was a jumble of pianos, Victorian furniture, bricks, and thousands of human bodies. In the unbearable Texas heat, decomposition began instantly. An epidemic loomed. Because the island was buried in ruins, the dead could not be buried in the ground. Bodies were loaded onto barges, taken out to sea, and dumped with weights. But the ocean, as if in mockery, returned them the next day. Thousands of bodies were washed ashore by the tide. In desperation, authorities ordered the dead to be burned. Giant funeral pyres burned over Galveston for weeks, filling the air with black, Swedish smoke. When the shock passed, the survivors faced a question: abandon the island or fight? They chose to fight. To ensure Galveston would never again fall victim to the ocean, it was decided to undertake an unprecedented engineering operation, the grade raising. It was a task of titanic proportions. First, they built a massive wall of concrete and granite, but that was not enough. The entire city was literally lifted into the air. Every surviving building, from tiny huts to the massive St. Patrick's Stone Church, weighing 3,000 tons, was placed on thousands of screwjacks. Hundreds of men turned handles simultaneously at the signal of a whistle, raising the city inch by inch. While the houses hung in the air on stilts, new pipes and utilities were laid beneath them. Then, giant dredges began pumping a liquid slurry, a mixture of sand and water, from the bay under the buildings. As the water drained away, a layer of dry sand remained. In this way, the level of the island was raised by as much as 17 feet. Citizens walked on temporary catwalks between the hovering houses while the earth grew beneath their feet. This catastrophe changed Texas and America forever. Galveston never regained its title as the premier port, losing it to Houston, which prudently dug a ship channel deep into the mainland. But the city performed an incredible feat that still seems impossible today. Galveston survived, becoming a monument to resilience. But the price of that lesson was unimaginable. 12,000 lives remain in the shadow of the great storm. The story of Galveston is more than just a weather report. It is a grim reminder that nature knows no mercy for those who ignore its warnings for the sake of silence in offices and profit in ports. Time in Galveston is now divided into before and after, the day the ocean came to remind man of his true place in this world.